We are trapped by the machines we build to free ourselves. J. G. Ballard. The Sky Market did not sleep. It didn't hum in the middle of the night like a healthy city. It didn't brood in watch rotations like a sect fortress. It breathed. Lantern light pulsed slow and alive along cables, strung like veins between platforms. Planks creaked. Rope groaned. Metal chimed low from somewhere below, steady, almost musical, not a bell, more like the deep resonance of heavy chains flexing against load. Farther in, voices rumbled, hushed but constant. Laughter too, low and tired. The soft clink of bowls. Dice hitting wood. Arguments carried just low enough to not call a knife. Everything swayed. Not violently, not enough to panic the villagers, but constantly, gently. The Sky Market was anchored and floating at the same time. The motion slipped into muscle as they walked, a small, inevitable side to side, like standing on the deck of a boat you've lived on so long you don't trip anymore. Zeng was very sure he'd trip anyway. He was moving on will and borrowed bodies. Han had his right arm hooked over Han's shoulders. Yun had his left around her waist. Zeng's feet remembered forward like it was a superstition. White robe draped across Yun's shoulders like smug fur armor, still from nose to tail alert. Ahead, Madame Shen followed this Jia woman, quartermaster, across a narrow gangway lashed with 3 cables and 2 planks. The thing bounced under their combined weight. Zeng's stomach tried to exit. "Don't look down," Han murmured. "I wasn't," Zeng muttered. "You were absolutely looking down," Yun said. "I was," Zeng started, then made the mistake of glancing left. Down wasn't down. Down was open. He'd expected mist, void, clouds, something pretty. What waited below the market was worse and truer, geometry that hadn't finished being born. You could see where platforms ended and nothing began. You could see map chunks half-instanced, like ghost streets with no collision. Places where roofs rendered but walls didn't, hanging in the air like sketches. Places where rock existed, slanted and hanging, but the textures hadn't loaded, so it was just pale placeholders with default _stone_ base still faint in the grain. And in between those fragments, empty glow. Not light. Possibility. Raw engine space, pale and hungry. Zeng felt physically ill. He'd worked in this stuff. He'd stood in graybox test maps with clipped walls and placeholder trees. He'd walked the edges of developer no zones and joked about falling through the world. He'd never thought about what falling through the world meant if you were actually alive. "Eyes up," Han said softly, more serious. Zeng dragged his gaze back to the gangway. "Good," Han said. "Still wasn't looking down," Zeng muttered. Yun made a small sound that was, in healer language, "I am humoring you because you're about to pass out." They crossed. Terrace 7 wasn't a terrace so much as a wide, reinforced platform bolted onto the ribs of the market like a barnacle with ambition. Old stone tiles had been laid down in rough rows. A half frame of what might become a wall someday had been hammered together out of scavenged timbers and scrap doors. Tarps had been strung overhead and weighted with hanging scrap iron to keep them from blowing off into the nothing. Rope nets served as safety rail in the gaps. It looked like a refugee camp built on top of a shipwreck and held together with attitude. It was perfect. Jia walked through it like a general striding into a barracks. "Put the elders under that tarp," she snapped, pointing. "Not that tarp, the one without the hole, are you blind?" "No, I'm not patching that hole now. I told you yesterday to fix it and you said tomorrow." "Well look, it's tomorrow, congratulations, you get to sleep damp." "Rice sacks against that beam? No, not flush, leave space or we get rot." "Chickens in the corner cage, yes, tie their legs, I meant what I said about soup." The Tianling villagers, bone-tired and running on fumes, still moved fast under orders. It was muscle memory. The work of people who had packed and unpacked their lives more than once. They started laying out woven mats. They lined up water jars. They stacked baskets. They put children down like precious cargo, wrapped in blankets, in a cluster between elders and the wall frame. 2 women in their 30s unrolled a bolt of patched cloth around the cluster like a low curtain, instant privacy for changing and nursing and crying where no one had to watch. Madame Shen stood in the middle of it all, knives still bundled in her arm, eyes moving, taking inventory like she'd been doing this in caravans her whole life. "Water?" she snapped. "Big jar, back left," Jia said without looking, still issuing orders. You get 2 full draws before morning, then we talk. Fire there, not there, unless you want sparks kissing the rope. Piss trench down the ladder and to the right. Don't fall off it. If you fall off it, I'm not cleaning you up. Understood, Madam Shen said. In any other world, that conversation would have sounded like hostility. Here, it sounded like respect. Shen Wuqin set her bundle of knives down next to the spot where she'd already decided she was going to sleep, not in the middle, not on the edge, just off center, where she could pivot to either threat or need within a step and a half, then turn slowly, scanning her people. Not the supplies. The faces. Her gaze paused on Zeng. There was a lot in that look. Thank you live there. Do not collapse live there. If you die I will strangle you back to life and scold you live there. He managed a tiny nod. Her chin lifted half a finger in answer, then she moved again, already calling, Yan. You sit. You're white as tofu, I don't want to scrape you off the planks. Lanfin, give me that baby before you drop her. No arguments. I will argue better than you. Yun exhaled quietly. She'll be fine, she whispered, like she'd just filed Shen under structural acid. She's terrifying, Han whispered, oh. She's my aunt now, Zeng whispered back. Han nodded solemnly. I support this. Bed, Yun said. Yes, healer, Zeng said. Say yes, healer again and I'll feed you bitterroot, Yun said. Yes, Zeng corrected, Yun. Her mouth flickered. She guided him to a patch of stone near one of the anchored support beams, under decent tarp and out of the main walkway. Someone, Jia, probably, had already dropped a folded blanket there. It wasn't much. Thin padding and woven fiber. Right now it looked like paradise. Yun and Han lowered him together. Zeng's legs gave up gratefully and he went down with more grace than he'd expected. His body didn't so much lie back as pour down. Cold stone against his spine felt like mercy. His head throbbed, deep and slow, like music played through bone. Bite hopped down and curled immediately against his ribs, chin on his chest, eyes still alert. Guard mode. You, Yun said, pointing 2 fingers at Han's face. Water. Yes, healer, Han said. She glared. Yes, Yun, Han corrected smoothly. Better, she said. Han flashed a grin and melted into the motion around them, casual and effortless in a way that made him disappear without looking like he'd left. Zeng envied that. Han could be anywhere and people's brains just accepted it. It wasn't invisibility. It was assumed presence. The of course he's supposed to be here field. Yun crouched. Her body finally let itself drop, just a little. She didn't sit on her heels, she didn't trust her legs to get her back up fast enough if something happened, but she eased down on one knee, close, anchoring herself with a hand on the tarp pole. Her other hand pressed, very gently, against Zeng's sternum like she was checking he was still under gravity. You're still shaking, she said. I stole a town, he said. That's not a medical answer, she said. It's why I'm shaking, he whispered. Her mouth twitched. Fair. Han slid back in and knelt, passing Yun a clay cup. She sniffed it, decided it was actually water and not whatever the market brewed when it said medicine, and pressed it into Zeng's hand. Slow, she said. Zeng hadn't realized how dry his mouth was until the water hit his tongue. It wasn't cold, and it had a faint tang like metal and spice, but it might as well have been rain from heaven. He drank greedily anyway until Yun pulled the cup back with a little frown. Slow, she repeated. He nodded against the tarp pole and swallowed. They sat there in a small triangle of exhaustion while Tianling settled around them and the market continued to move around them. For a while, that was enough. Just breathing. Just being allowed to breathe. Having a roof, well, tarp, over your head is the first feeling of safety after catastrophe. It doesn't matter if the tarp is patched and leaking and strung on scavenged rope over stolen stone. It's a roof. Your mind lets go in steps. Zeng's mind, unfortunately, didn't know how to let go. It was still holding the tether. He could feel Tianling pulsing around him. Soft, constant, like a heartbeat pressed to his back. 62 signatures, no, 65 now. He frowned. Han, he whispered. Han had been watching the way the rest of Terrace 7 eyed Tianling. He glanced over, alert instantly. Why 65? Zeng said quietly. Han blinked. 65 what? People, Zeng whispered. There are 65. Han frowned. There are 62, he said. We counted. Yun's head snapped toward Zeng, eyes sharp. Where? She whispered. Zeng closed his eyes and leaned into the tether. It wasn't sight. It wasn't hearing. It was knowing. Map in his head, but not a physical map. Map of presence. 62 warm, steady pulses, clustered in Terrace 7. Worn down, tired, consistent. He could tell which one was Madame Shen. Hers burned steady and controlled and stubborn, like banked coals. He could feel Yun, hot and crackling and alive. He could feel Han, erratic at the edges, like flicker light. He could feel the old man with the milky eye, soft and thready but still there. And then, 3 more. 3 that weren't market guards. He could feel market guards too now, and they felt like wire, tense, alert, coiled, territorial. 3 that were wrong. Dim, but intense, like embers with no ash around them. He followed the sense. There, he whispered, and lifted his chin toward the far edge of Terrace 7, where Jia had ordered spare tarps stacked against a half-built railing. Han's eyes flicked. Yun's hand left Zeng's chest and went to her staff. Stay, she said. I am staying, he whispered. I didn't mean you, she said, and rose in one fluid, controlled movement that did not look at all like the movement of someone who'd just walked a haunted void for an hour while carrying an old man and a screaming toddler. Han was already moving. He flowed to his feet and padded across the stone, easy, casual, not drawing attention, not because he was sneaking, but because he knew better than to spook a market platform at night by moving fast towards something unknown. That was how you got 6 knives in your throat from 6 directions with 6 different motivations. Yun didn't have that instinct yet. Yun just stopped. Han reached out and caught her wrist without looking back. She shot him a glare that could have immolated a sect elder. He tilted his head very slightly toward the rest of the platform. She followed his tiny gesture with her eyes and saw 5 different market hands watching her like hawks. She exhaled slowly, jaw tight, and forced her shoulders to drop half a finger. They went together, controlled. Zeng watched because he couldn't not. His whole body was buzzing now, keyed up. Exhausted, yes, but also lit. Tired. The way you get after you've sprinted for your life and then stop but your cells haven't. And, deeper, under his own thoughts, he could feel those new presences moving too. Curious. Fearful. Hopeful, in that brittle, painful way people get when they haven't let themselves hope in so long it almost physically hurts to try. Yun and Han reached the tarps. Zeng saw them both stop, just for a heartbeat. Han sank to a crouch. Yun lowered to a knee. We're blocking his view. Caught flickers, pale cloth, movement, heard Yun's voice, soft, coaxing instead of commanding for the first time tonight. It's all right, she murmured. Not heaven. Silence. We're not, she said again, and now there was anger under it. Not. Another voice, tiny, dry, cracked. Are you real? Zeng felt something hit his throat so hard he had to swallow twice. He knew that question. He just heard that question inside his own mind from a god. Are you real? He pushed himself up on his elbows again and instantly regretted it. His body rebelled. Stars popped at the edges of his vision. He kept himself upright anyway, teeth clenched. A minute later, they came back. Han first, moving slow, palms open. And Yun, and in her arms oh. Zeng's breath left him. There were 3 of them, like he'd felt. All children. Who weren't Tianlings. He knew Tianling's kids now. Girl with the clay charm. Boy with the missing front tooth who'd tried to pet bite and almost lost a finger. Toddler with the loud scream and the sticky hands. These 3 were strangers. The oldest, maybe 8? 9? It was hard to tell, was the one Yun carried. The child clung to her with both arms and both legs wrapped tight around her waist, face buried against her shoulder. Too thin. Too light. Hair ragged and cropped like someone had cut it with a knife and shook. Clothes, gods. Clothes were wrong. They weren't clothes. They were. System fabric. Blank gray, textureless, seamless, like the placeholder robes NPCs wore before you assigned them a skin. Except this had been worn hard, scuffed, torn, crudely tied back together with string and talisman strips. Behind Yun, Han held the second by the hand. That one couldn't have been more than 5, and they didn't walk so much as stumble, like their legs weren't used to moving without being told to. Their eyes were wide and flat. Shock. They had the same blank gray fabric, but it was too big, hanging off one shoulder. The third walked between them on their own. This one was tiny. Maybe 3. They weren't crying. That was the worst part. No tears. No sobbing. No noise. Just enormous, dark eyes and a face that looked smudged. Not dirty. Smudged, like their features had been blurred and repainted too many times. The tiny one wasn't holding anyone's hand. Every few steps, they reached out and touched Yun's sleeve with 2 fingers. Like checking. Like, are you still there? Yun's jaw was so tight Zeng thought she was going to crack her molars. She brought the oldest over and sank to her knees again to set them down next to Zeng's tongue. The child refused to let go. Yun made a soft sound in her throat and just stayed. Kneeling in the cold, curled forward to let the stranger bury themselves under her chin. Han guided the 5-year-old down into sitting against the support beam. The kid went obediently, legs folding like they'd been told to do that motion before but never done it by choice. The tiny one didn't sit. It walked straight up to Zeng, stopped right in front of him, and stared. For a heartbeat they were utterly still. Then, with a seriousness that felt ritual, they reached out and pressed their small palm against the mark circling his wrist. The promise burned hot for one instant, like recognition. The child's shoulders dropped a fraction. It let out a tiny breath. And they sat down. Right next to him. On him. Right on his hip, like a cat taking a spot. Zeng made a small, helpless sound. Han's mouth quirked. Congratulations, he murmured. You're a couch. Yun shot him a lethal look. Put his hands up in surrender. Zeng looked up at her. Ooh, he said quietly, are they? Yun swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was low and fierce. They were in the tarps, she said. Hiding? No, not hiding. Placed. Han nodded grimly. Somebody stashed them. Tuck them out of the way like extra gear. Not market, Yun said. Market girls don't stash children like contraband. No, Han agreed. Market hides people, but we don't. Shelve them. Yun stroked the oldest child's hair. Motion was practiced and careful and shaking a little. They say, she whispered, they ran. Zeng felt anger rise like heat. From what? He said, too quietly. Yun looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Pull back, she said. Something in his chest gave. Remember, she said. Remember their homes. Remember fire and light and people screaming without sound. You remember the sky splitting in lines. You remember hands. Light. Cold. Gentle. Her mouth twisted around gentle like she wanted to spit. Hands picked them up and took them. And then, nothing. It's all gray after that. Just gray. They say they were told their names. And then they were told new names. And then they were told new names again. Zeng swallowed. They know their names? Yun's jaw clenched. The oldest says her name is Lin. Or was Lin. Or might be Lin. She doesn't sound sure. The little one with Han doesn't answer to anything yet. The tiny one just looks at you like you're water. Zeng felt something twist behind his ribs. He looked down. The smallest was sitting on him like a monarch claiming territory. Her eyes, huge, dark, glossy, hadn't left his face. Up close you could see that smudged wasn't dirt. It was artifacting. Flicker between 2 sets of facial data. The cheeks would blur subtly, then snap sharp again, like the system kept trying to swap in a different version and failing. Swallowed. Hey, he said softly. You okay? The tiny one blinked. Slow. Then, in a voice that was more breath than sound, they said, you're loud. Zeng choked on a laugh. Sorry. They shook their head, very serious. No. Good laugh. That should not have hit him the way it did. Felt his eyes sting. Looked back at Han and Yun. Count, he whispered. 65 isn't a mistake. They're counted now. Yun nodded once. Sharp. Han exhaled. Congratulations, he said softly. Scanling just adopted 3 anomalies. Ike, who had been watching all this with bright, intent eyes, scooted closer to the tiny one. He bumped his head very gently against their arm, then turned and flopped half over onto his back, exposing his stomach. The entire platform went quiet for half a heartbeat. Market hands who had been pretending not to stare literally leaned in. Even Madame Shen, across the terrace yelling, "You cannot sleep next to the piss bucket. Are you insane? Move 2 mats over or I'll remove you." Paused mid-lecture and looked over like, what? Because Bite never did that. Bite, whose whole personality was scam God, mock God, bite God, never, ever offered his belly to anyone. The tiny one blinked down at him. Then, in a deeply ceremonial way, they patted Bite's stomach. Bite made a small chuffing sound like, acceptable. Han whispered, "Reverend, oh, that's not fair." Yun's mouth twitched. "He outranks you now," she murmured. "He's 3, Han hissed. "He outranks you," Yun repeated. Zeng let out a breath that tried, and mostly failed, to be a laugh. His body was trembling again, but differently now. Less adrenaline. More aftermath. He could feel the threads inside him humming where Contract Fox's bonds sat on his wrist. The carried presences, the grief embers, were calmer now. Less frantic. Less clawing. He realized why. They weren't alone anymore. Not alone in him. He'd been the only warm place they could grab onto when Tianlin ripped free. Now they were in a place built out of rebels, with lanterns and cables and anger ensued. They had bodies to cling to, children's bodies, but bodies. They had Yun's arms. They had Madame Shen's voice. They had Han moving like a knife that had chosen a side. They had Bite's ridiculous stomach. Zeng let that hit him. He let himself feel, for just a heartbeat, like he bought them something real tonight. Not salvation. Not forever. Just a first place to sit. He closed his eyes. The world swayed. Yun's hand was on his shoulder again, steady. "Sleep," she said softly. "I have questions," he mumbled. "You can ask them when you're conscious," she said. "Sleep. If I sleep," he muttered, "the core's going to talk to me again." Han leaned in. "Tell it you charge hourly," he whispered. Zeng snorted weakly. "Sleep," Yun said again. He opened his mouth to argue one more time, because habit, because control, because he'd spent his whole pre-death life grinding through exhaustion and calling it discipline, and then his body just shut it down. Not gradual. Like a switch. His last conscious thought was that his head had finally tipped to rest against Yun's thigh, and that Yun hadn't moved away. Then everything dropped. This time, the room wasn't white. It wasn't even a room. It was a street. Zeng knew that street. His breath hitched. He was standing on cheap cracked pavement under a flickering sodium lamp that needed replacing for a year and never got it because the property owner swore he'd put in a ticket. Old gum blackened flat underfoot. A leaning bike chained to a metal post. Neon bleed from a hot pot place on the corner washing the rain-slicked asphalt in blood orange and electric blue. San Francisco, his brain said automatically. Out of Richmond. 2 blocks from the studio's back door. Coffee shop on the left, the one Shu Ling swore made real cold brew and not brown tap water. He swallowed. It smelled like wet concrete, oil, and cheap scallion pancake. He hadn't smelled like that since. "Hey," said a voice behind him. He didn't jump. Of course he didn't. He'd know that voice if he woke up in someone else's bones. He turned. Shu Ling leaned against the brick wall just under the buzzing lamp, half in shadow. And for a dizzy, stomach-twisting second she wasn't glitch smear, wasn't light, wasn't a refracted echo. She was just Ling. Warm skin, not white godlike pale. Hair in a messy bun, chopstick stabbed through. Shorts. Drawstring half chewed. Eyes tired, sharp, alive. Cheeks flushed like she'd just come from an argument she won and is still running on the blood high. He almost couldn't breathe. "Ling," he whispered. Her mouth did that thing, the little twist that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite a wince, that meant she was relieved and mad. "You absolute idiot," she said softly. His throat clenched. "Hi," he croaked. She pushed off the wall and walked straight up to him, reached up, and put her hand on the back of his neck. Instant, grounding. Instant, home. He hadn't realized how starved he was for that. His eyes burned so fast he had to shut them. He leaned forward, forehead meeting hers, shoulders curled in like someone had reached into his chest and finally let him let go. For a few seconds, there weren't gods or patches or markets or anything. There was just the alley behind their office at 1:40 in the morning after a build break, standing in the glow of a dying street lamp with rain turning to mist, her hand on his neck, his hand fisted in the back of her hoodie, both of them vibrating with caffeine and fury and tired affection. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey," he whispered back, voice cracking. "You look like hell," she said. "You're not even rendered right," he said. She huffed a laugh into his shoulder. "Yeah," she said. "We're both not exactly cover models." He swallowed. Pulled back just enough to see her face again. "Looking," he whispered. "They said you're fading." Her eyes flicked. "Yeah," she said, and tried for casual. "Well, you know me. Can't sit still. Dissolving now, too. Multitasking." "Looking," he said again. His voice broke on her. She exhaled, and for a second the edge dropped. She looked tired. Not code tired. Human tired. It gutted him. "Hey," she said softly. "Don't. I'm still here." "For how long?" he whispered. Her mouth did that twist again. "Long enough," she lied. He almost laughed, wet. "We're really doing this," he said. "You're lying to me and me pretending I don't hear it."